In fact, what it doesn't assume is that there could be a reason for evil, and that evil could have a temporary reign, but that it will be destroyed. But in the process, when it is over, we'll look back and realize that it achieved something that we could not have otherwise seen. I use the analogy of a drama. We've talked about this already. Again, going back to the imagery of a divine comedy, as I mentioned a couple of weeks ago, when you have a Shakespearean comedy, you typically in the process see increasing amounts of misunderstanding, misconstruals, that lead to a great deal of pain and apparently broken relationships, even the possibility of death. And as the comedy goes on, you see the threads are getting all entangled, all discombobulated. Everything looks like it's this big ball of thread that's all completely discordant. And all of a sudden, at the end of the play, what occurs? It all gets resolved. Some deus ex machina, some God out of the machine. That's the idea. The Greeks used to do this. Whenever they had a real messy, a thorny problem, they'd actually lift a god. They'd actually do. They had a little a pole that they'd use, and they'd drop a god down onto the stage, and he'd solve the problems, and they'd haul him back off. You see, so they call it a deus ex machina. We want somebody, a little god, to come down and solve the problems, and then go off, and all's well. Well, what Shakespeare would do typically is he would then sort out the problems, and there would be just before total chaos ensued, there would be a resolution. Misunderstandings would be clarified and so forth. But guess what would happen in his comedies, and it always happens. What would happen is you discover that many of the characters will have developed qualities that they did not otherwise have. That the difficulties actually led to a greater growth in the character development. That's true of A Midsummer's Night Dream or Much Ado About Nothing. If you discover again and again that that in the process, the pain, as you look back at the end of the play, turned out to be redemptive. And this is what I have been saying before, that the biblical perspective is that the story we live in is a story where pain can be redemptive and can serve a purpose. And that God is bigger than our pain and has actually underwritten the cost of our pain. So those are just some thoughts along those lines. Now there are basically just three alternatives. There are four technically. We could say God exists and evil doesn't. Let's start with this. Evil exists and God doesn't. The second one is God exists and evil doesn't. That's a possibility. A third approach is that God exists and evil exists. The fourth one, I don't know if anyone holds it. God doesn't exist and neither does evil. Well, there are maybe a few philosophical Buddhists who maybe hold that. But the bottom line is typically that the argument that God exists and evil exists and God doesn't, I've just mentioned, can be refuted by the claim that you don't know the whole story and that there could be a reason for evil that we do not perceive, and that while God is all good and while God is all loving, He allows something to happen for a temporary sojourn, season, such that something greater will emerge. Do you see that concept? And I'm not going to go into the arguments against atheism per se here, but just to say that in my view, the much more satisfying view, and in every respect more satisfying, is the idea that this is an ordered world and that there are purposes in our lives. But at any rate, the idea that God exists then has to be wrestled with, and we have to understand that there are implications that this would have. By the way, anytime I say evil exists and God doesn't, I'm actually presupposing an absolute good. See, as soon as you use the word evil, evil means nothing unless there is a good that is unchanging. Do you understand the reasoning there? Because if you say that there is no absolute for good, then you cannot say that there is anything called evil. Evil, you see, in that structure, and if you're a naturalist, you'd have to admit this, is not a thing in itself. It's an evil, in fact, turns out not to be. It's just the way things are. You can't turn an is into an ought. If you basically do not believe in some ultimate good, then you cannot turn an is into an ought. There's no moral basis for morality. What appears to be morality really is just what we picked up from our instincts or something that was socially conditioned. But nobody lives as if it's just instinctual or conditioned. What happens when we get angry? You see, we don't act that way. We act as if it's a genuine injustice. This is why I've told you, I know at least twice before, that I have a very quick and simple way of turning a moral relativist into an absolutist. All I need to do is when I see a nice long line of people, I walk up to the head of the line and just stand there and watch the fun. You see. Because what will happen immediately, the people will say, who do you think you are? Who gave you the right to be up here? And they will be, what? Morally indignant. They're not going to say, well, I just feel this way because I was programmed this way. They don't act that way. They know it's wrong, you see. And I could say, hey, look, I'm a naturalist. Basically, I believe in the survival of the fittest, you know, get a life. You want to do something about it, you know? Might makes right. You see the point there? But people know that nobody can live in a moral vacuum. And while we claim to be relativists, we do not live that way. That's just why we applaud things and why we condemn things. Am I correct about that? It's a continual issue. And that's why I often say that no one can live consistently with the logical implications of a non-theistic worldview. That you will live, even if you're an atheist, as if God exists. You know why? Because you will assume that there are some things that really are right and wrong at the end of the day, and you'll live that way. You'll live as if some things are beautiful and ugly, and you'll live as if some things really are true or false. Regardless of what you claim, your life will belie the fact that you live as if there are really some absolutes. So you can see this argument can be actually turned against the atheist, the argument. As soon as you appeal to evil, what are you appealing to? You're appealing to God. And this is why C.S. Lewis so correctly said, unless ultimate reality is moral, you cannot morally condemn it. Let me say that again. Unless ultimate reality is moral, that is to say God, you cannot morally condemn it because you're appealing to some kind of an absolute for good to condemn your view of God who is not good in your mind. You see the problem there? I told you this wouldn't be easy today, but we're just going to move on to the second one. God exists and evil doesn't is a third option. By the way, the other one is that, God exists and evil doesn't. That's more of an Eastern view. That there's at least some kind of an idea that that there's some kind of there can be a God, but evil's an illusion. Of course, you'd have to deny your sense. Christian scientists, by the way, embrace this idea, basically. Anyone know a Christian scientist? It's kind of an odd position because it's not Christian and it's not scientific, but that's another matter. But anyway, Mary Baker Eddy leads them to believe that things like disease and death and pain, those kinds of things are actually illusions of mortal mind, she called them. She appealed to this weird thing she got from Phineas T. Quimby called animal magnetism. You know, just kind of this idea of this kind of something that is wrong but isn't really wrong. Just gives you that. It's just malicious animal magnetism she talked about. At any rate, you know, you might say that, but even though that pain that I'm feeling when I'm sitting on a tack, I know it's not real, I claim, but it sure feels like it's real. And you sure act as if it's real. In other words, it's consistent and arose by any other name. You know, whatever you want to call that thing is very consistent. Am I correct about that? Things, you'd have to deny all your senses and experiences